Thank God for the Apostle Thomas. He can understand my unbelief, my doubts about faith, about God, about whether goodness always triumphs over evil, or just plain lack of belief that God never abandons His very own. Don't some of us have those moments? Many well-intentioned preaching on this gospel about the Apostle Thomas, who has received a moniker, Doubting Thomas, tell us not to follow the temptation to doubt like Thomas. But I wonder whether it is even spiritually possible if we have to grow in relationship with God. I say doubt if you have to, if that would increase your longing to touch the wounds of Jesus. But do not despair, do not succumb to staying away from the believing community. Companion to grow in faith. That's the story of faith of our spiritual ancestors. Do you remember Saint Teresa of Calcutta? When she passed away, the process of her canonization immediately started. And the investigators found her personal diary and her correspondence with her spiritual director. Do you remember what they found in her personal diary, what she had written? She was filled with so much doubt. In fact, she described that, coming to prayer was not so easy for her, that she would spend hours and hours in front of the Blessed Sacrament and would doubt whether God was there. And yet, she was considered by everyone, when she was still alive, a living saint. And now she is a saint, Saint Teresa of Calcutta. I guess one thing that we can consider for our reflection on the second Sunday of Easter, which is also the Divine Mercy Sunday, is the relationship of personal faith to the believing community. That Easter is incomplete away from the believing community. Fearful like those, his close friends, dejected for what happened on Good Friday, disappointed, broken, and hope in Jesus crushed. It is not hard to see someone like Thomas say, "Unless I see the marks of the nails on his hands and put my finger into the nail marks and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." For that statement, the disciple had been given the unfortunate moniker Doubting Thomas, which seems unfair. Consider for a moment Peter, not only doubted but denied Jesus 3 times. And yet, despite Thomas' doubt and unbelief, Jesus doesn't seem to rebuke him the next time around. He was able to see and touch his wounds. Thomas became a great evangelizer, and tradition has it that she brought the faith to India. And for Thomas, he has a good reason to doubt. Imagine someone telling you that one of your dearest relatives has risen from the dead. They'll probably say, "Are you kidding me?" You see, there's a lesson here that can be drawn in this gospel reading beyond beating Thomas for his doubt. Thomas' problem is one that we all have. He speaks beyond his knowledge. He judges before he has considered. He condemns what he does not understand. He wants proof. He wants evidence. Which of us has not done that? The lesson for this Sunday is this: that faith in the risen Lord is impossible to sustain. It cannot grow and it cannot deepen outside of the believing community. If you do it on your own, if you stay away from the believing community, your faith in the risen Lord cannot be sustained. Notice that when Thomas was off by himself, his doubt got the better of him. He did not get to see Jesus and hear him and his message. The doubt of Thomas is the absence of Thomas. Only when he rejoined the community was he able to say, "My Lord and my God." The fact is, no one believes all the time. No one can feel God's presence all the time, but the believing community does. And that says about being a church, a community of disciples that listens and encounters Jesus. We are a gathering of Christians, more than just people congregating for random social gatherings, but instead faith assemblies that are the body of the risen Christ, taking up the mission of Jesus. We support each other, and as a faith community, we become more than the sum total of our own individual selves. You exhibit the gift I don't have, and I exhibit, I hope, those gifts that you don't have. You believe when I struggle with doubts. I believe when you struggle with doubts. There's one story about Pope Francis, because during these days we stand in mourning and solidarity with the global church, with the whole world, mourning the passing of a great and beloved Pope. And maybe many of you have seen this video on social media. I do not really understand what was the situation, but Pope Francis had a public address, and there were a lot of children, around, Pope Francis. And there was this little boy, maybe as young as my friend here, Joanna. And this little boy called Emmanuel was given a microphone. It seems like this boy had a question for Pope Francis. When he came up to the microphone, he could not actually do it. He could not proceed. He was sobbing. He was crying. And he said, "I cannot do it." And Pope Francis said, "Emmanuel, Emmanuel, come, come." And the boy climbed up the stairs and went to Pope Francis, and he hugged. And the boy was just sobbing, crying. And the camera was actually focusing between the two, an elderly man and a young boy, talking to each other, and the boy was sobbing, and Pope Francis was talking to the ears of this little boy, Emmanuel. And so when the boy actually went down back to his seat, Pope Francis explained. He said, "If only we could cry just like little boy Emmanuel." He asked Emmanuel if he could actually say in public what was told by him, and Emmanuel said yes. And the Pope said, "If only we could cry just like Emmanuel." The boy said, he just lost his father not so long ago. And the father was an atheist. But he baptized his 4 children, including Emmanuel. The little boy wanted to ask, is my Father in heaven? You would notice that Pope Francis did not answer the question with yes or no. He eventually said, "It is easier for a parent to baptize children if they are a believer than a parent to baptize children when they are unbelievers." And he said, God is proud of that. And then he asked the children, "Do you think God will abandon a father who was good, who baptized, his children?" And the kids said, "No." And the Pope said, "Louder." And the kids screamed, "No." And then he turned to Emmanuel and said, "That is the answer to your question." I thought that was really a very tender and very intimate moment of a Pope answering a boy who was so deeply stricken by the passing of his father, whom we consider as a good father. If that would be an adult, so much grief, with so much doubt about God's love, maybe that person would have stayed away from the believing community. And so, when doubt becomes strong, When the temptation to drop out is severe, resist it. When monotony sets in, when prayer life becomes a dread, when you feel disconnected from God, when sin abounds, when sin bounds us up and locks us up into ourselves, when work or other activities take up our time for worship, when all the social institutions are plainly not supportive or affirming of our faith beliefs, the temptation to drop out is too strong. It is true that for faith and belief to be nurtured, the conditions and environment that it needs must be present. In a secular society, in a materialist society, where faith practice is seen as a private matter, faith may find it hard to grow. And faith is a gift. We need to pray for it and be humble enough to grow in it. It also demands the conditions for it to flourish. Just like an athlete who trains hard and avoids food that weakens the body and lifestyle that is detrimental to one's performance, so is the path of faith. The same is true with the sacraments in particular. Next Saturday, we'll have 2 Masses for First Communion for children. And receiving the Eucharist is something beautiful that will nourish their spiritual lives. And the regular reception of the Eucharist and going to confession will allow our first communicants to love Jesus more, and Jesus will have a special place in their lives. Again, the reality that faith flourishes within the context of faith-filled people, and it languishes in the context of faithless people, that is hardly a revolutionary thought. It's just common and plain sense. Or if you want to use symbolism of today's gospel, when Thomas was left or was absent in the faith community, he became unbelieving. When he rejoined the community, he found his faith. In other words, faith is hard to come by in a culture of disbelief. Doubting Thomases cut off from believing community will multiply. Finally, remember the other nickname of Thomas in the scriptures? He is called Didymus, which means twin. He is called a twin not for nothing, not for anything without sense, because he has millions of siblings. All those who are perplexed, honorable people. And when we feel his doubt, unbelief, of crisis of faith, we must do what he did. Go back to the community and resist the temptation to drop out. And finally experience people of faith, the folks who, after all their troubles and doubts, have found their center. No doubt about it, Thomas is our hero, the one who was healed of his lack of belief through Jesus' wounds of mercy. As we mourn for the passing of a great Pope, Pope Francis, we thank the Lord for his life, for his legacy, for allowing us once again to hope, for making kindness radical again, for orienting the church, and that mercy be at the center of our proclamation, for speaking truth to power. And last Easter Sunday, he gave his last Easter blessing. But the following day, Easter Monday, he passed away. It seems like he gathered his last strength to speak for Gaza. And his last public address was a call for ceasefire, for an end to war. May the good Lord reward Pope Francis and allow him to be in the company of saints and martyrs in heaven. We thank Pope Francis for his life, for his love, for his humility, for his mercy. May he rest in God's peace. Amen.